My question is, under one of your presidencies, do you intend to circumvent the progress that's been made for gay and lesbian soldiers in the military?
Yeah.
What would you do with soldiers like Stephen Hill? I mean, he's out.
Look, what we're doing is playing social experimentation with our military right now. And sex is not an issue. It should not be an issue. Leave it alone. Keep it to yourself, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual.
So boos from the crowd, the debate crowd last night after hearing from a service member protecting our nation, followed by that response. Well, everybody really failing to thank him for serving our country. And it's just the latest in a series of really strange crowd reactions and candidate responses in these Republican debates. Let's bring in Chris Hayes. He's the host of Up with Chris Hayes every weekend right here on MSNBC. Chris, it's nice to see you.
Great to see you too, Thomas.
What is your reaction, the audience response, especially last night? We're on the heels of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Bravely, courageously, this person who's fighting in Iraq submits that question, publicly asks it of the panelists, the GOP hopefuls, and Santorum, that's his response.
First, I'd like to know what that guy's workout regimen is, because he is jacked.
He's got some guns.
He is jacked, which is the thing that overwhelmed my input when I was watching. But more seriously, I think that I don't want to be unfair, because it's hard to tell. You have a crowd of 1,000 people, right, or however many people are in that room, how many people are booing. It didn't sound like a ton. That said, the more disturbing thing to me was the applause that Rick Santorum's answer got, because that was much louder and much more considered. And Rick Santorum's answer was a defense of the policy. Fundamentally, It was, of the policy that's been repealed. It was a defense of a discriminatory policy. And then, because he realized how sort of odious it would be to say, well, sorry, dude, you're kicked out of the U.S. Armed Forces, he said, I wouldn't kick them out.
Right, I could grandfather him in now.
Right.
But it was a missed opportunity for a lot of people to stand up, because they love to stand and wave their military support all the time. And talk about that and funding for our military. This was a missed opportunity.
I absolutely agree, and I think that one of the things you saw in that moment and in the answer is that there's been all this conversation about what's called social issues truths, right? That the kind of Tea Party version of the Republican Party post-Obama is focused on fiscal issues, fiscal house in order, and they're not playing the culture work hard.
Right.
But what you see time and time again in the debate is that the base is still very hung up on cultural issues. I mean, they are still invested in all of the stuff that they were invested in through the duration of the decade.
Well, in the phrase of social experimentation, I get out of all of these things that many of these candidates would rather take legislation to build a time machine and go back in time to where we had, no women voting.
Yes.
Slavery was cool. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous.
Well, I also thought that what was interesting about the response was that he seemed to imply that there is no sex in the armed forces. He was basically saying, this is not, this is
right.
Everybody should
Nothing happens on shore leave,
Nothing happens in the armed forces. And it was like, really? Have you talked to any members who serve?
Have you been to Fleet Week in New York? Anyway, let's move on to Rick Perry and talk about his performance last night. I think some people today are pretty critical of the fact that you could literally see smoke coming out of his ears at certain times when he was crafting his digs toward Mitt Romney.
It was, I thought, a fairly halting and bumbling performance, more or less. Again, I'm not the intended audience, so I'm never quite sure how things are playing with the people that he's speaking to versus playing with me. But I thought that Romney was fairly self-assured, and I thought that the sort of iconic moment was when Perry managed to bungle the one big sort of set-piece, pre-teed up attack on Romney for flip-flopping, and he had it there on his index cards, and he was kind of bumbling around it and reading off it, and I was sympathetic because I too have bumbled lines while trying to read. But it definitely sort of epitomized the fact that he doesn't quite seem ready for prime time in that regard.
I think a lot of people can have compassion for the fact when you're trying to stick it to somebody, but in the high stakes game at what they're up to, those are the moments that are going to be, you go big or you go home.
That's exactly right, and Romney was able to sort of get his digs in. I also think Romney has set up this interesting dynamic. He's got one issue where he could get to the left of Rick Perry, which is Social Security, appeal to independents, try to make Perry look totally unelectable, and also appeal to older voters. And now he set himself up with an issue where he can go to the right of Rick Perry, which is immigration, and Romney's really sort of pandering red meat answer to the question of the DREAM Act, which is a piece of legislation Rick Perry signed in Texas that allowed children of illegal immigrants, kids who came here when they were young, to go to state schools. It's a fairly, I think, humane piece of legislation. Well, Romney went fully to the right on that one and fully to the left on Social Security, and he has set himself up this sort of nice kind of chessboard where he can play those pieces simultaneously.
So let's draw them right in. We mentioned CPAC. Governor Romney already speaking this morning. Let's take a listen to this.
My friend Governor Perry said that if you don't agree with his position on giving that in-state tuition to illegals, that you don't have a heart. I think if you're opposed to illegal immigration, it doesn't mean that you don't have a heart. It means that you have a heart and a brain.
A lot of Wizard of Oz references there. But this morning's spin on the immigration issue, that's going to work for Romney. I mean, the drumbeat that he's putting out right now.
With the base, particularly. I mean, what was so interesting about that Rick Perry moment was here's an eminently sensible, bipartisan, compassionate, just, and practical piece of legislation that was just indefensible in front of the Republican base. And no matter what he said, he was not going to be able to defend it. And you could see the delight for Mitt Romney, who's always been tagged as sort of a squish, as conservatives say, someone who's not really in the right-wing camp. The delight that he now has this issue that he can just bang the sort of conservative drum on.
And what do you have coming up for the weekend?
This weekend, we are going to be talking about Troy Davis's execution. We will be talking about the president's new class, his quote on Thursday that if I'm a warrior for the middle class, I wear that with a badge of honor. And we'll be talking to the Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr. as well as Randy Weingarten from the National Education Association.
I brought out this pastry tray for you. So I wanted you to feel comfortable.
Thank you.
Because I was up with you last weekend and I was watching so many guests that it seemed like musical chairs for muffins because not everybody was going to get one.
Well,
so I wanted to give you some so you can.
We will gladly accept these and double stock tomorrow. And I'm glad that the muffin tray has become an iconic centerpiece.
It is. So I thought you'd like it. We will saran wrap that and have that ready for your guests tomorrow. Hopefully none of them are watching now to know that they'll be a tad bit stale. Chris, great to see you. Thanks so much.